governments realize that they need to provide assistance to incentivize the movement towards these stated objectives. Governments are setting new standards with respect to emissions. They're setting standards with respect to fuel economy. For instance, China is considering setting a target of 40 miles per gallon for light duty or for passenger vehicles. In Europe, they're setting increasing standards with respect to CO2 emissions, with respect to particulate emissions, etc. And they're being very, very aggressive about that. But I think at the same time, governments realize that they have a role to play, that they need to be providing stimulus in the sense of helping the transportation industry move along with respect to the creation of technologies that will respond to these environmental and new fuel economy standards. For instance, in Europe, they have government grants that they're providing to the transportation industry. In China and India, and certainly here in the United States, we're doing the same. With the stated objective of trying to advance the state of technology that will improve fuel economy, that will result in lower emissions. I think that's a dynamic. I think within the industry itself, I think OEs, or vehicle manufacturers, are going to be more aggressive in terms of introducing new vehicles. Vehicles that are based on battery technologies, vehicles that are electric, have electrified powertrains. And then there's going to be this totally new dynamic that we hadn't faced before. The idea that now transportation industry meets the utility industry. Later this year, we're going to have the introduction of the Volt by General Motors. In addition, we're going to have the introduction of the Leaf by Nissan. These are going to be the first electric vehicles. One will be a plug-in. The other will be a pure EV. And now we have to deal with the interface between transportation and the utility industry. How do we recharge these vehicles? There's going to be a real trend towards further development of the grid, of the infrastructure necessary to support more EVs, so that you and I, as we use these vehicles, we can recharge them at home, at work, or anywhere we go. That's a new dynamic that we never really had to consider in the transportation industry. Think about this. Think about being at home and now using your vehicle actually to generate power and to download that power onto the grid, so that you now become a net provider of power that the utility industry can now use to sell to others and use for other needs. That's a totally new dynamic that we'll have to deal with in the transportation industry. Now, what does it mean for SAE? With respect to SAE, I think we need to understand the new requirements of these technologies. What does it mean in terms of standards, specifications, certification, validation? What does it mean when you say a vehicle can have a fuel economy of 230 miles per gallon, and it's partially an internal combustion engine, and then it's partially battery driven? What does that mean? And what does it mean to you and I as a consumer? As an SAE, we need to help provide the leadership in terms of setting those standards. What about the protocols? What about the transfer of energy from a vehicle to the electric grid? Do we do it at 110, 220, 440, single phase, three phase? How do you control that? And then how do you do it when you're not necessarily at home? What if that vehicle is in California instead of in Michigan, where they may have different rates, they may have different protocols? How do you deal with that as a consumer, as a transportation industry? Those are factors that we've never really had to deal with in the transportation industry. What happens if that vehicle now is a global vehicle? Let's say it's manufactured by a Toyota or General Motors or a Volkswagen that have global platforms, and they sell those vehicles around the world. Are the protocols, are the standards, are the performance requirements going to be the same? Or will we in the industry have to deal with this range, this variance, this complexity of standards and operating protocols? Those are some of the challenges we haven't addressed as yet, but for these technologies to be successful, we're going to have to solve those problems. So there's a range of things that are going to happen here over the next 5 to 10 years. We will prove out really whether the electric vehicle can be a viable alternative for transportation. We will prove out whether electrification of the powertrain really has the net benefits. We will prove out whether these technologies can be affordable. We will prove out whether these alternatives will lead to the improvement or sustainability of the lifestyle of the standard of living that we have come to depend upon.